carbon cycle in forests, but also in general, starts with a plant that uses energy from the sun to convert carbon into oxygen and sugar, which they use to grow and eventually die and are consumed by bacteria or animals. These animals release carbon and eventually die as well, and are consumed as well by other species, which then die as well. All living things are made of carbon, and all living things die, and some that die are released into the atmosphere eventually, and some turn into fossil fuel, but some turn into rocks due to pressure underground, but then are also released due to heat. And with that, the cycle continues. But humans dug up the carbon in the ground in the form of fossil fuels, coals, etc. And of course, using it thereby releases it into the atmosphere. And they did it in such great volumes that too much carbon was in the atmosphere, disrupting the cycle. Too much carbon in the atmosphere meant heat being unable to escape the atmosphere. But today, we focus on forests, the canopied carbon sinks of the earth that absorb 7.6 billion metric tons of carbon each year. A carbon sink is anything that absorbs more carbon from the atmosphere than releases. And forests, as I said earlier, are carbon sinks.
But burning fossil fuels in combination with destruction of carbon sinks due to deforestation and other activities has contributed to more and more carbon dioxide building up in the atmosphere, more than can be absorbed from existing carbon sinks such as forests. The buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is driving global warming as it traps heat in the lower atmosphere. Carbon dioxide levels are now at their highest in human history. Fossil fuels are pumping much more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than existing forests can absorb. At the same time, carbon stores in forests and other natural carbon sinks will become increasingly unstable as climate change progresses. Droughts, tropical storms, heat waves, and fire weather are increasing in severity and frequency because of climate change. This will continue to result in increases in forest losses, contributing to more and more carbon dioxide being released into the atmosphere. And what effects has that have on forests? The removal of trees and other types of vegetation reduces available food, shelter, and breeding habitat. Wildlife habitats become fragmented, where native species must live on remaining habitat islands that are surrounded by disturbed land that is being used for agriculture and other uses. They must obviously relocate, and they are actually manually done so.
Good evening. I'm Agent Nolyatan, and I'm here to present to you what is translocation. Translocation is the practice of intentionally removing plants and animals from one area and releasing them in another to improve their survival chances and combat their biodiversity loss. It is usually considered as a last resort method, but conservationists warn that intensive and sometimes controversial forms of intervention may now be needed. That should tell you the gravity of the situation. But there is also not so positive side to this all, but more of a neutral. For context, I'm here to present to you what are the rainforest layers. First, the emergent layer, next the canopy layer, the understory layer, and the forest floor. Because of how ecosystems work, some species are able to thrive and some decline. Studies have shown that non-native plant densities increase as resistance to human population decrease and levels of anthropogenic damage increase. Anthropogenic meaning related to or resulting from human activity. In the case of the study, it found that cowhage, which requires a lot of sunlight, is seen to thrive in the degraded forest due to human activity. Degraded meaning not full demolished. Lantana, which does not thrive in canopied forest and since having the forest being served in the study biodisturbed, has been growing in large densities. But there are some things that could be discussed in terms of how human activities affect the ecosystem. In studies of natural populations and through ecological experiments, we have some level of information about how genomic and epigenetic mechanisms may contribute to organismal response to the environmental challenges. But these ideas have already been applied to the understanding of invasions, as of Munger et al. 2021. The primary way that epigenetics could play a role in plant invasions is by contributing to phenotypic variation and adaptation of invasive plant populations, which requires linking epigenetic mechanisms to the traits of invaders, their abiotic and biotic interactions, and how these are linked to the fitness advantages of invaders, and thus adaptation. In addition, invasive plants are generally expected to evolve quickly because of the novel selection pressures they experience. For example, the enemy release hypothesis suggests that escape from native herbivores and other specialist enemies explains the success of many exotic species. And the evolution of increased competitive ability hypothesis proposes that after such enemy release, some invasive plants relocate resources and rapidly evolve towards less defended but more vigorous ecotypes as of Munger et al. 2021. Though we are unable to access studies that had the specifics of these topics. So there you go. A not so positive note, but not a too negative one to end the discussion.